What's up, y'all? I know. Yeah, platinum. That's all I'm gonna say. But yeah, nonetheless, I'm finally back. Yeah, I've kind of just been here, forgetting, but yeah, rotation continues. Today we're gonna be giving Luffy Rukia's powers. Again, I apologize. I really am trying to get back to the 3 day thing, but yeah, it's kind of not working due to my very long streaming schedule, which leaves me tired, plus work, which leaves me even more tired. But I will try to get these videos out to y'all, these what if. Also, I just want to clarify that also I am working on like platinum videos as well as these, so it's really a lot, but I'm happy to bring you guys the What If movie. What if Luffy had Rukia Kuchi's, or I'll probably just say what if Luffy had Rukia's abilities, because I don't know if I'm saying her full name, but anyways, yeah, I don't think I've ever seen anyone in the what if space ever give anyone Rukia's abilities. So guess what? I'm giving Luffy Rukia's abilities. If you guys do happen to enjoy this video, be sure to leave a like, leave what up suggestions, and on to the video right now. So we start this story off where we would see Luffy most of the time, which is getting thrown into a ravine by Gar. Because, well, that's basically where Luffy's childhood begins, because we don't know anything about the befores. That all we know is Luffy as a kid. And Garp, well, being the grandpa that he is, doesn't really want Luffy to be weak, but also doesn't really want Luffy to become a pirate, because before that, Luffy was on the island with Shanks, and Shanks had already influenced Luffy to, well, become a pirate, and Luffy was determined to do that. And seeing that that was the way Luffy wanted to live his life, Garp just couldn't stand for it. He didn't want this to be the case, so of course he would throw Luffy off a ravine. Now, I want to make this clear. I didn't say this just a few minutes ago, but I will say this now. This is probably going to be like a part one. Then, we'll get into like the full movie after, just simply due to the fact that, A, you guys seem to actually kind of be messing with the part one stuff, or at least from what I'm seeing. So y'all don't really hate the part one stuff. So I'm probably just gonna keep probably putting out part ones and then doing the whole thing. As again, if you guys didn't know this, I kind of just full straight up sit down, record the full thing in one take for the movie. I don't, because I don't want to like lose track of what I was talking about. So I full record the full movie. When I do a full movie, I was there for the whole hour and whatever, sitting there recording that. I don't ever stop and then keep going. And if I do stop, it's because somebody interrupted me literally for like a minute or two, and then I get right back into it. So yeah, I'm there for like the full recording. So yeah, it gets a little taxing, but I'll be back with some full movies. Trust me, soon. I'll just, not right now because I got all this stuff going. But yeah, sorry for the brief intermission, but here we go back to the story. So as you would see, nonetheless, Luffy would obviously want to become a pirate. Garp wouldn't like it. Garp would eventually take him to Dadadan and the other bandits, and this is where Luffy would meet Ace for the very first time. Of course, Ace doesn't really like Luffy at first, running away from him, getting him sent in traps, be a little annoyed by him, but deep down kind of like him. Anyways, this eventually leads to him meeting Sabo. The whole Ace ASL situation takes place. Sabo tells his dad off, he doesn't want to be a part of the family anymore. And after all this happens, they beat the Blue Jam Pirates, and of course, Luffy, Ace, and Sabo become brothers. Yay! And once that happens, this is where we see them begin to start training. Now, of course, it's a little hard, or it was a little confusing to write Luffy getting Rukia's powers, because I didn't really know how I wanted him to get Rukia's powers. It's kind of weird because Rukia is obviously a Soul Reaper, and giving somebody a Soul Reaper's powers can be a little bit difficult, because I don't know if I should just say like, oh, Luffy transforms into a Soul Reaper to use the powers, or he just blatantly has Rukia's powers outright. But considering Rukia is like a Soul Reaper like all the time, like, and she basically uses like a husk, I just figured that in base he would just have Rukia's powers. Like, obviously he would have to summon his Zanpakuto, or in this case, Soro no Shirayuki, but you get the point. So ultimately, I just decided to say base Luffy would have the powers of Rukia. So nonetheless, it'll make sense. Yeah, it'll make sense. So we see Luffy training with Ace and Sabo. Nothing too crazy so far. But this is when we quickly realized that it wouldn't stay that way. As while training with Ace and Sabo, who were stronger than Luffy at this point, Luffy would have accidentally done something that he wouldn't even have been trying to do, but I'm pretty sure you can imagine what this is. Now, as you guys all know, a Zanpakuto is basically the person's soul, or it's linked to it. It's basically a part of them. You get the point. So basically, when Luffy was about to get attacked by Ace, this is when Luffy would subconsciously unleash Zoro no Shirayuki, which is also, if you didn't know, Sleeve of White Snow, or also Rukia's Zanpakuto. And when it comes out, obviously it would shock the mess out of Ace, as he almost got cut by it. And Luffy would be shocked to see this blade come out of thin air, and so would Sabo and Ace. They would be completely confused, wondering how this blade just came out of thin air. Obviously, nobody in One Piece would know what a Zanpakuto is, or how that would even exist, or how that even functions. So everybody here, including the fact that they're kids, would all be very scared and shocked by this. They would question Luffy on how he was able to do this, but he would have no answer. Sabo, of course, thinking this was a devil fruit ability, but then would remember that Luffy ate the gum fruit that he got from Shanks. So there's no way that this is another devil fruit, because I'm just going to be saying Sabo knows that you can't eat more than one. Anyways, with that being said, this is where we would then see Ace, Sabo, and Luffy basically try to work together to come up with an idea for why Luffy was able to do this. Obviously, they're not going to have any answers. They're not going to figure anything out, but they'll just note it down in their personal book. You know, it's their little secret, you know. Luffy can summon his sword out of thin air. And I want to clarify that Luffy also has no idea how he just did that, and also doesn't understand its connection to him whatsoever. Of course, Luffy would eventually be able to dispel his Zoro no Shirayuki. I'm probably just going to be saying Zanpakuto for now on, unless it just sounds cooler to say the full name of the blade, but you get the point. So once this all happens, this is where we see the boys sleep, eat, go back to the, the bandit hideout, mess with Dada, and Dada gets a little mad, gets a little worried, being the best mom or whatever. And eventually we all see them grow up slowly. But this is when the day would appear where none other than the Celestial Dragon would come in his ship, as Sabo would depart to start his pirate journey. Of course, this would normally be where Sabo would get blown up and get cooked. But this actually isn't what happens here, because Luffy sees it happening, and I'm going to be saying something a little wild happens in this one. So when Luffy sees this happening, or sees the Celestial Dragon that's about to attack Sabo, instead of just sitting there and crying, which is actually something I would actually expect Luffy to do in this situation because he's a kid, Luffy subconsciously unleashes his Zanpakuto. And when Luffy unleashes his Zanpakuto, this is where we would see him use one of Rukia's main attacks. Now, of course, in most of my what ifs, and this will be no different, I'm going to be saying that, of course, Luffy has an influx of information deep within his brain. And of course, since he's subconsciously doing all of this right now, like something Zanpakuto, he would unknowingly just automatically unleash one of the attacks of Rukia, which would be none other than Haruken. Which, obviously, if you didn't know what that is, I might have butchered that. Might need to hear that being pronounced again. But Hakuren. Oh, yeah, I know I said it wrong. Hakuren. My bad, I said that way wrong. Anyways, Hakuren is basically like when Rukia, I know you guys know what it is if you watched Bleach before. It's basically when she shoots like a lot of ice towards the opponent she's facing. She does that move a lot. So, yeah, you know what I'm talking about. Anyways, he does that move, and it basically completely freezes the entire ship that Celestial Dragon's on, pretty much stopping them right in their tracks. And once Luffy does this, Sabo will look back in shock at the fact that A, he was about to get blown up by the Celestial Dragon ship, and 2, the fact that Luffy was able to pull that off. Now, Luffy, after doing this, will fall out immediately due to overuse of power. I'm going to be saying because Luffy is young, and also because I'm kind of mixing his body with a regular Soul Reaper and a regular human body. I guess he needs to have some limiter on how much power he can actually expend as a Soul Reaper while still possessing Soul Reaper powers. So yeah, there you go. So just like that, he gets knocked out. Ace immediately takes him. Sabo docks his maid ship, and they run into the forest to hide. Because as Celestial Dragon was attacked, Admiral will come. Now, I don't really care what Admiral comes, just think about whatever Admiral you like the most would show up. They would look around, they wouldn't understand what happened, because clearly this giant level of ice, it can't be traced back to anybody. Because if it wasn't very clear to you, it's not like Luffy just was very visible. He was in the tree line and he saw it and then he unleashed it. Anybody on the ship that could have possibly witnessed it, well, they all got frozen ice solid. Now, of course, Aokiji could probably break them out of the ice, but of course, no one would really know what happened once they get broken out of the ice, because Luffy wouldn't be there anymore, and they genuinely wouldn't even understand what happened in the first place, as obviously Luffy was really small and the ship is really big, so I doubt they would even see him to begin with. With all of this happening, of course, Luffy, Ace, and Sabo would know what happened, but pretty much nobody on that ship can tell what would happen outside of the kid who was on the side that a Celestial Dragon ordered to be shot. Of course, I'm gonna just be saying Aokiji is the one here. He would look at this and be thinking that maybe that's connected, but there's no way a kid could, do this. Like, he'd be thinking there's no way. So he just ignores it and ultimately decides to just leave it be, as he can't find the perpetrator who performed this deed. As there's nobody here that should have an ice devil fruit, because of course Aokiji himself has the only ice devil fruit. So he just knows that, frankly, he doesn't really understand how this was pulled off. But he would just say, well, I can't really do anything because I don't know who did it, and he leaves. A Celestial Dragon is angered by this, but what can he do? And of course, Luffy is safe. So now that that was done, this is when Ace, Sabo, and Luffy would talk about what happened, and Sabo would decide to stand back. He wouldn't, want to rush out there and go into the great big world. But of course, because this happens, this is when Dragon, who normally was there to just look at Luffy, and do all that stuff, would actually come and talk to the boys. The reason for this is because A, Dragon was watching when Sabo was saved by Luffy and he saw what Luffy did, and two, he saw what happened and he knows he needs to say something, even if he knows to keep his distance from Luffy. That was a major offense, a major crime. That was something that could seriously get him killed if he does it again. And that's his son, and he loves him, so duh. And with all that being said, this is where we would see Dragon go up to the three boys and obviously begin to start talking to them and explaining his whole deal. And once Luffy hears this, he'd be like, I have a dad. And Ace and Sabo hit their heads because Luffy sounds dumb. And Dragon is shocked to hear Luffy didn't even know that was something that he actually had, because, well, he is his dad, and he's just kind of shocked to hear that too. Anyways, after all this is done, this is where we would then see Kuma show up, as well as we know Kuma used to go to the island with Dragon, so we'll just say Kuma was there too. And with this happening, this is where we would see Dragon and Kuma not only teach the boys about how to not be stupid and do dumb stuff like that, but would also train them in the ways of just training them. I don't really know. I was gonna say in the ways of something, but I don't really know what. Now, if you're wondering if they would learn hockey, well, no way they would be strong enough to learn hockey yet. So no, I guess I could have said train them in the ways of hockey, but I was gonna just they're just getting trained. They're just learning battling and combat, and it's much more than they would know in the main timeline. They know how to fight better. You get the point. Of course, I'm going to be saying Dragon would instill hockey fundamentals into them, but other than that, nothing too crazy. Although what I will be saying happens here is Sabo still chooses to go with Dragon, because Sabo realizes after talking to Dragon and hearing about the way the world is, that deep down, he's a revolutionary at heart. So I believe Sabo would give up on his pirate dreams, even though they weren't crushed, or he wasn't or he didn't lose his memory in this timeline. I just feel like since Sabo did that with his memory gone, and he had such a high conviction to it, even when he got him back, he still was all deep down revolutionary. And I feel like talking to Dragon and having this whole conversations with him, Sabo would still choose to that life. So of course, Sabo would go on to leave with Dragon to become a revolutionary to help others and obviously liberate others. And Luffy and Ace would be sad to see Sabo go, but they wave him by. And this would be where Dragon and Kuma would come back every once in a while to, check on them, train them a little bit, try to see if they can do something with hockey, which they wouldn't be able to, but just instill the fundamentals for later on. And they get pretty strong, way stronger than the main timeline, because they're training with two of the strongest people in the verse. Maybe not in the verse per se, but two of the strongest people that you could probably train with, or you would want to train with if you had a choice, I guess is what I'm saying. Dragon is probably top 5, so maybe he really is one of the strongest in the verse. Kuma is a warlord, so getting trained by a warlord can't be that bad. Anyways, with that being said, eventually Dragon would stop coming because, well, he needs to be a revolutionary leader, and Kuma would stop coming too because, well, he has to help Dragon. So once they stop coming, they would tell him this is gonna be the last time they show up, and well, that would be it. And Luffy would say goodbye to his dad. As of course Garp was still coming around, trying to get Luffy to stop being a pirate, messing with him and Ace. You get it. And with all that happening, this is where we see the story keep going on as Luffy and Ace would begin to train with each other, similar to the main timeline, but not as down in the dumps or as sad or for a purpose, as of course Sabo was actually alive and they knew it. So they wouldn't be down and really crazy going into training. But don't worry, Kuma and Dragon's training kind of balanced out the fact that Luffy and Ace wouldn't be going as hard, but they would still be training crazy because they still want to become powerful pirates or known pirates. So with all this being said, this is where we can now get into Luffy's training and like what that's basically given him or how much stronger he's gotten over this time period. So Luffy by now has figured out how to A, unleash his Zanpakuto at will, B, he's been slowly but surely unlocking more and more of the like information that sits deep within his brain. That Luffy also tells Ace that sometimes he sees these visions of, you know, how to do these moves, and he just starts to do them unknowingly and just knows what they are and how to do them. And Ace would genuinely just say, well, that's kind of strange. But nonetheless, if it's going to make you stronger, then work on it, practice on it, and use it, and try your hardest to reach the level that's necessary to bring out all that power or all of that information. And that's exactly what Luffy would do. As we would see Luffy slowly but surely learn first dance, second dance, third dance, and of course, slowly but surely learn some Hado. And of course, not just Hado, he wouldn't just learn that. He would also, of course, learn some Bakudo, which of course is like the spells of Bleach, you know, like Bakudo #1, you know, stuff like that. Rukia can do that. So obviously Luffy would also be able to do that. With that being said, this would ultimately lead Luffy to becoming really powerful really quickly and making him way stronger than Ace. Simply due to the fact that Luffy was just way more versatile than Ace could ever hope to be. And this isn't even including the fact that Luffy had already started learning like the prerequisites for hockey. And on top of that, Luffy still ate the gum gum fruit in this timeline. So Luffy still was training his gum gum body. So with all this being said, Luffy was just getting way too broken, genuinely way too fast. But there was really nothing anybody could do. So with that being said, Luffy was getting the best out of life right now and slowly but surely becoming one of the strongest people in his verse, slowly but surely. Of course, with all this training with Ace, eventually Ace would start to actually be able to use the hockey training that Dragon had instilled and actually learn how to use base armament and basic observation. And because of this, Ace had now reached the solid age of 17. And even though I know this was because of Sabo that they originally left at 17, I'm just going to be saying that Ace would do it now because why not? He did it in the original, so I'm just going to be saying he'll do it now, even though I know it was for a reason. Either way, I don't really see why that should change, is what I'm saying. So I'm going to be saying Ace leaves now. And now that Ace is gone, that leaves Luffy by himself. Which, of course, Luffy as well, with the additional 2 years of training that he would have under his belt, would now also know how to use base observation and base armament. Yeah, I know what you're saying. This is kind of an overpowered Luffy you're making right now. But yeah, I mean, it's Rukia's abilities. I don't really know what you were really expecting when you got into this video. I know you're saying that, well, if you're going to make him like have Rukia's powers, maybe you could have at least toned down like what he learned at the beginning of the story. But no, sometimes you just gotta make Luffy overpowered. So anyways, with all this being said, this would bring this short mini time skip and, you know, kind of information dump to an end, as we then see Luffy as he would be leaving to start his own pirate journey. We would see the likes of Makono, the mayor of the village, and of course Dadon and the other bandits waving Luffy off as he would leave, as of course the Lord of the Coast would appear as he would try to eat Luffy whole, which everybody gets scared. But this is when Luffy would of course use none other than a Gum Gum pistol and slam it into the Lord of the Coast, defeating him in one mighty blow. With that being said, everybody would wish Luffy good luck as Luffy would leave, only to not too long after that get stuck in a barrel where he would run into Kobe just like he does in the main timeline. And of course, after he gets free, he would help Kobe by sending a Gum Gum pistol into La Vida, defeating her with ease. Now, I want to make it very clear, Luffy does have all that stuff I said, but unless there's an opponent actually worthy of Luffy using that stuff, he's not going to bring out his Zanpakuto, he's not going to bring out Hado unless it's necessary. He's not going to really do any of that stuff. And I want to also say something else, which I haven't really said about Luffy's personality that much. Of course, this is not a reincarnation, so this isn't like what if Luffy was Rukia Kuchiki's reincarnation, right? That's not what this is. This is what if Luffy had Rukia's abilities. So he's not going to be exactly like Rukia. In fact, I would say he's basically just canon Luffy at this point with Rukia's abilities, which is perfectly fine. I mean, he's a little more, you know, mature, and he understands a lot more about the world but that's not because of Rukia's abilities or anything, or I'm even trying to make him a little bit like Rukia. It's literally just because Dragon trained him from a very young age, and so was Kuma there to help with that as well. So it made Luffy a lot smarter than he would have initially been. As Garp, really in the original, all he could really do was even with Deaden and the bandits and stuff. So yeah. Anyways, with that being said, this is where we would see Luffy's journey basically keep going on as he would eventually reach the town where basically Zoro was at, and basically he would get Zoro to join his crew the same way he does in the main timeline. Luffy only showing off his devil fruit abilities and stuff like that. Now, of course, over time, Luffy during his training had of course unlocked a very useful technique that I think I should probably bring up right about now. And it's one you guys are probably familiar with if you ever watched Bleach, and it's none other than Flash Step or Shumpo, which is basically an advanced movement technique that allows, a Soul Reaper to move faster than an Aiken trap. Basically, it can make them move faster than light in some cases, so I'm not really sure how fast Rukia's is, but I'm going to be saying her Shumpo is like maybe, well, just that. It's just faster than the Aiken track, so just keep that in mind. Now, of course, that's Shumpo, not it's not Soru, right? Yeah, I think it's Soru. That's the technique that the CP9 people use to move. They kick their feet 7 times fast. I think that's what they use. And basically, Luffy would eventually shave. Yeah, it's shave. It's shave in English. Yeah, so shave. Luffy would obviously tap into that with Gear Second later on. So let's just say Luffy has a better version of that already. And not only that, will probably be even faster with Gear Second later on. But you get the point. So anyways, after that happens, this is where we would then see Luffy as he would continue his East Blue Gauntlet, which honestly, I don't really need to get into too crazy because it just kind of goes the same. Kuro gets one shot. Really, he has no chance against Luffy, especially with Shumpo. And obviously, Luffy with Dragon's, intelligence, he would not really hold back against Kuro at all. Kuro would kind of get defeated a lot earlier. And of course, because Luffy also has Haki, which is base observation and base armament, Kuro really had no shot of even really touching or damaging Luffy with Shumpo and obviously the training he's had. Which, of course, if it wasn't very clear, Luffy isn't just Haki, which obviously, even just doing this training for Haki would make Luffy stronger than base. But he trained with Dragon and Kuma too. So Luffy was just way too strong for Kuro. He was too strong for Buggy. He was too strong for Alvida. And honestly, none of these East Blue people even remotely stand a chance against Luffy. Mihawk would automatically realize once we get to the Baratier that Luffy genuinely was somebody who he could look forward to making a big splash in the future. Just because he knew Luffy probably had Haki, because he could just sense his presence, and it just wasn't like other people's. But that was because of Luffy's spiritual pressure, which obviously would ooze off. And I'm going to be saying, since Haki is spiritual in nature as well, that would kind of bleed into it a little bit. So you get the point. Nonetheless, Zoro would still lose to Mihawk. And again, like I said, I'm kind of going through the East Blue Gauntlet because none of the people in the East Blue Gauntlet really matched Luffy in the original either. So it really is pointless to go over a much more powerful, much more capable, much more stronger Luffy fighting these people. Arlong literally wouldn't even have a chance because Nami would literally tell Luffy about her situation, and she just sees how much more capable Luffy is in this timeline and how much more trusting he can kind of be thanks to, having his whole time with Dragon and, him kind of in giving Luffy some of his advice. Of course, with that happening, Nami would tell Luffy would one-shot Arlong, defeat all the fishmen. Really, he could do by himself, but he wants his crew to, show their worth, help out if they want to. So they help. Sanji, Zoro, Usopp. And with that happening, that brings the Arlong Park arc to an end extremely fast because Luffy just beats Arlong really without even really trying. He literally sends it flying into his, park, his big building, and he's done. After that happens, this is where the Straw Hats would, of course, head to Logtown, where they would learn about Roger's death. Well, Luffy really would, because he was interested in it. And of course, Smoker would try to fight Luffy, which is normally where I usually have a little bit of an issue with Luffy, because most of my Luffys don't know Haki by this point. But this actually isn't the case for this one. He actually does. So Luffy would use armament Haki. Obviously, Dragon told him it would be effective against people who have Logi abilities. And once Luffy sees his first punch go straight through Smoker, he would use Shumpo to get back, which is shock Smoker, because he couldn't even like see Luffy move there. And of course, this is where we would then see Luffy coat his hand in armament haki and slam another gum pistol right into Smoker's face, knocking Smoker out instantly, as he didn't expect that at all. And he didn't even know how he got hurt, because Smoker, by this point in the story, didn't even know what haki was, just like Luffy didn't. So Smoker clean knocked out. With that being said, which I don't really know how that's possible. And maybe he did know what it was, but he just had never encountered anybody that could use it at this point. But I mean, he would later on learn how to use it in time skip. So did he learn it after time skip? I don't know. Anyways, once this is done, this is where we would then see the end to the Logtown arc, as they would all leave. They would all put their feet on the barrel and, you know, say their dreams, say what they're going to achieve in the Grand Line. And just like that, this is where Alabasta starts. So once we start Alabasta, this is where we would see Luffy and his crew as they make their way to, of course, Crocus, where he would give them the log pass. Of course, the Baroque Works would try to do something to Luffy and gang and incorporate it. It doesn't work. They make it to the my bad. I always forget what this place is called. I don't know why I can never remember what this place is called. But they get to this island where basically, you know, all the assassins are, and all the assassins try to kill Luffy and his crew. You know, they're all trying to be, oh, we're all cool, we're all friends, we're all nice. But then, of course, the assassins come out at night to obviously kill them and, you know, steal their stuff. But, of course, Zoro and Nami can hold their liquor, so Zoro just solos them all. Now, I could say Luffy fought Zoro here, but if I did, Luffy would defeat Zoro with ease, so much to the point I really don't think it's fair at all. So what I'm gonna be saying is Luffy just ate way too much this timeline, and he just never woke up, and he never found out about any of this. Well, okay, how about this? He woke up, saw everybody was defeated, but he didn't know who actually did it. And there we go. That's how that works. That's actually what should have happened, probably in the main timeline anyways. With that being said, this is now where we see the end to this little thing, as Luffy would obviously take Vivi up on a request to take her to Alabasta, so that obviously they can overthrow Mr. Zero or Crocodile and obviously save her hometown. So, of course, with that being decided, to Nami's dismay, the crew would obviously decide to help Vivi, and of course we would see Igaram die to what appears to be the hands of Nico Robin. As she would go onto their boat or farm, Luffy would destroy the log pass like usual, because he's still really just regular Luffy. As the story events keep going, then they would get to Little Garden. The two giants we see are Dory and Brogy, who are, you know, currently in the story right now, really big, massive characters. And of course, they do the whole thing on really, the thing about this is really nothing is changing, because Luffy isn't really going to go all out. And honestly, if it was an opponent Luffy fought in these arcs, just know they got defeated way quicker, and really just move on, really. And the same thing can be said about Drum Island. Like, Wapple, be for real. No, like, be for real. Wapple, no chance. And with that being said, they equip Chopper to the crew. Yay, Chopper joins. And after Chopper joins, they would head off to Alabasta for real this time, finally arriving there. Obviously saving Nami's life. And, well, thanks to, you know, the Doctorine and Chopper. So now that they're at Alabasta, I'm going to be saying this happens. They get there. They obviously have to walk around the desert for a while. Luffy eventually gets to the city, which he's happy to, because he's starving, he's hungry, he needs to eat something. So he runs into the place, and of course his brother Ace is there. His brother. But you know what? Luffy don't care nothing about his brother, because Luffy is too hungry, and he knocks Smoker and Ace clean out, running right into them to get some food. And they're just shocked by this. Everybody in the building is just shocked by this. But of course, Luffy ignores it, and obviously they just ignore it enough to give Luffy food, so he starts to eat. So this is when he's told that he made that hole in the wall. Smoker comes back, Ace comes back, but of course Smoker overrides Ace because he wants Luffy's head for knocking him out with that punch. Luffy sees him. Unlike the last time, or unlike in the original canon, when Luffy saw Smoker, he ran away because he knew he couldn't beat him, because he couldn't hurt him. This would not happen here. Since Luffy already knows how strong Smoker is, and because he already defeated Smoker, when Smoker tries to do something, Luffy would just use Haki and view it into his hand, grab Smoker, throw him out of the building. Sure, he can keep eating, because I think that was something Luffy would do. This is when Ace would come through the door and start talking to Luffy. To Luffy's shock, he'd be extremely elated and extremely happy to see this. Of course, Ace and Luffy would then get out of there with Luffy taking as much food as possible because he's hungry, and he would eat it. As Ace would pay for the tab because, well, it's his brother. I'm just gonna be saying Ace does that. Once this happens, they would talk about, old times, talk about what's going on, and Ace would reveal that he stopped his goals of becoming a pirate to help Whitebeard become a pirate instead, which Luffy would be shocked to hear, but he would say, well, good luck with that, as Luffy would tell him that he's actually there to basically liberate this whole country from Crocodile. And Ace would hear this and think, really? Well, that's ambitious, don't you think? Well, he would say good luck with that because he's out on the hunt for somebody named Blackbeard, which Luffy would keep in mind for later. But of course, this is where the two brothers would separate, as we would then see Luffy start to make his way back to his crew to obviously take down the likes of Crocodile. Eventually, we get to that confrontation with Luffy and Crocodile, where Luffy decides to fight Crocodile as the rest of his crew goes on to basically fight the rest of Baroque Works. So this is where we would then see Crocodile versus Luffy, part 1. Or should I say, Luffy versus Crocodile in general, because there is no part 2 or part 3 or any of that, because Crocodile instantly loses to Luffy. Now, up until this point, Crocodile thought he was pretty awful, he thought he was pretty strong, he thought he was pretty capable. So he thinks he'll have no problem with Luffy, he's enjoying his low intangibility, he's enjoying the fact that nobody can really do anything against him. He's enjoying all that in the, good old early part of the Grand Line. The problem is Luffy is basically somebody that should be, beyond the new world at this point. He has Haki, right? He should be beyond the new world. So, of course, Luffy, with relative ease, defeats Crocodile, because Crocodile is sitting there thinking, oh, Luffy can't hurt me with his bare fist. That's not possible. But no, it very much is, as Luffy would spam Gum Gatling into Crocodile's chest, dealing him tons of damage. And of course, Crocodile, after one Gum Gatling, is already heaving and just not really there. Remember, Luffy is, of course, stronger than he was in the main timeline. And in the main timeline, Crocodile and Luffy were about even in physical. So yeah, Crocodile would do a pretty good job of taking Luffy's attacks, even though they were coated in water. But here, Luffy is just blatantly stronger than Crocodile's physicals. And not only that, he's imbuing arm and Haki on top of it. So Crocodile doesn't really take those punches too well at all, and gets defeated by a Gum snap from Luffy right after that. Again, this being another case of Luffy not really needing his Zanpakuto or really any of his abilities to defeat his opponent, as his opponent just isn't capable of giving him a thorough challenge. As Crocodile, as far as we know, even now, still doesn't have Haki. So yeah, just imagine Luffy with Haki fighting Crocodile early on in the series. It just wouldn't be close at all. And let's say I hadn't even given Luffy Haki in this timeline, he could have easily beat Crocodile Sand by just freezing him. So yeah, it still wouldn't have worked out for him. Anyways, just know that Luffy is continuing to train. I thought I would throw that in there. He's still continuing to train and get stronger every day, on top of training his Zanpakuto every day as well. And of course, he would have told his crew about this and showed them, but they would be shocked to see that Luffy could even do this, considering they already know he had like a devil fruit, and it was obviously the rubber devil fruit. So they would be shocked that Luffy just had this extra ability and nobody would be able to explain. Anyways, because Crocodile is defeated first try, Vivi is able to stop everything from bad from happening. And basically all we need to know is Alabasta saved. Robin still is able to convince Cobra to show her the poneglyphs. Robin still joins the Straw Hats because, well, she has nowhere else to go, because she kind of just didn't know, like, oh, there was more. So she was like, you know what? I'm going to join that crew. Maybe that'll be the next best place for me, since Baroque Works have, went under, as of course all the Straw Hats won their fights, as well as Luffy winning his with ease. And of course, that leads to Robin joining the crew, which is extremely lucky and a really good time for the boy, Luffy, because she's the only person on the planet that can read poneglyphs. Now that is over, this is where we would then see the crew proceed to the next island, which will be none other than, of course, not Skypiea, but the island before it. I always forget these islands, even though I have a really good memory of them once I get through recording. But at the beginning, I just can't remember what the islands are called. So forgive me. Jaya. Yeah, I knew I was gonna think about it. So they go to Jaya, right? And once they get to Jaya, Luffy meets Blackbeard. Bellamy still pulls that stunt, but because Luffy met Shanks at a young age, he lets it slide. Bellamy robbed from the man that Luffy obviously was talking to, him and his crew were talking to, about the Sky Islands. And because Luffy doesn't like that, he spins the block for that man, and he one-shots Bellamy because of it. And once that happens, Bellamy's crew shuts up, and Luffy goes back to worrying about the Sky Islands. So they would go to Skypiea thanks to the water or the knockout stream. And once they reach the Sky Islands through that way, they would run into the Skypians, and basically Skypiea happens. Now, in my what ifs, I usually skip Skypiea. Don't skip Skypiea if you actually watch the anime. That just don't do it. That's just not what we do. But mainly because the only thing that really matters to the story here is two things, which is A, that the bell is rung, which Luffy would still do, but not because he beat a nail doing it. He just would beat a nail easily because he has hockey and because he's rubber and because he's way stronger than a nail in general by a long shot. And a nail would just get walked the floor with almost immediately once they pretty much figure out where he is or a nail shows his face for the first time. Yeah, he's pretty much finished when he meets Luffy instantly. There is no part two. There is none of this other stuff. There's not gonna be any of this gold hand. Luffy just wins. So with that being said, that ends Skypiea as they would fall back into the sea as they would continue on their journey to the lands of Water 7 to repair the Mary, as it would start to look pretty bad, for the Mary. But of course, this is where they would learn into Long Ring, Long Land. All right, y'all. So yeah, this actually isn't gonna come out that bad. I mean, it was just maybe a couple of days over on the extended time, I guess, but actually, really not that far off because, well, I'm locking back in, like I said, as much as I can, or try to. So yeah, but you guys are gonna be watching like the next thing, and you're just gonna want to watch the full movie at this point because if you guys just clicked on it because you saw part one and you didn't want to watch the last video, well, then that's perfectly fine because this is the full movie. And well, yeah, just know that I'm adding this part. So if you guys did watch part one, this is where you will now get the full movie, as I'm going to just be doing the full movie in this video. So yeah, anyways, I don't want to keep you because if you did actually rewatch part one with this video, then let me just get into part two. I don't really want to ruin the, cohesiveness that's going on here. So without further ado, let's dive back into the story right now. So we pick up the story where we left off with, of course, Long Ring, Long Land being the next destination. And once they get there, they would be introduced to the Foxy Pirates. And of course, not only that, Luffy and Usopp and Chopper would run into a horse, and they would really like this horse. And the old man would also obviously be the owner of this horse. Of course, this is when Foxy would try to shoot the horse to get the Straw Hat's attention so that he can challenge him to a Davy back fight. But this would not work, as not only would Luffy intercept this using Shumpo, so yeah, he just blatantly gets in front of the bullet there with ease, but not only that, because of his rubber body, it just deflects it. Foxy notes that Luffy has rubber powers and is immediately speed blitzed in one shot, and he tells the rest of Foxy's crew to take them and leave. After this happens, the old man is happy for Luffy for saving his horse, and once that's said and done, it's where we see the into the we see the into the Foxy Pirates as far as Luffy is concerned. As you guys all know, I don't really care for the Foxy Pirates. Long live Afro Luffy and all, but other than that, I don't really care for it. So with that being said, that's just the end of Foxy in this what if, and on to the next thing. So as the crew is going to the next island that's right over, they would see Chopper running ahead as he would go behind a boulder where he would run into a tall, lengthy man. And this tall, lengthy man would reveal himself to be none other than Admiral Aokiji, which to everybody's shock, Robin would be the most terrified of him, as she was the one to tell the crew about this. This is where Usopp would tell him, "What are you doing here?" Doing that whole thing where Aokiji would be like, "Wow, another super hot lady with like big bazongas." I think he would tell that to Nami. I'm pretty sure that's what he says. And Nami's like, not Nami, but Sanji's like, "Hey, what do you say?" And anyways, Aokiji would then proceed to do Aokiji things until he uses the Ice Age on the, the ocean, and then basically make that pathway for all the people to, get to the next island so, they don't, die or whatever. So, they can, enjoy life and what have you, doing the natural admiral duty. But once that's all said and done, eventually Aokiji would want to test Luffy and his mettle, test his crew. I mean, he is his, teacher's grandson. So, he wants to test them. He's not actually planning to capture Straw Hats, but he wants to see what the new group that Nico Robin has aligned herself with is really capable of. Now, Aokiji would obviously, like you would expect, like he tried to do in the original timeline, would obviously try to freeze Robin. But since Luffy has observation haki, that wouldn't be happening. And Luffy would be able to see the coming and grab Robin out of the way using Shumpo and obviously get Robin to safety. So once Robin is safe, this is where we would then see none other than, of course, Luffy tell his crew to get out of here, as Luffy is more than capable of handling this. And although in some of my what ifs, you might think Luffy's a little crazy for saying this, or even in the original timeline, you might think Luffy's crazy for saying this, but in this what if, yeah, you're just gonna be seeing what happens. So Aokiji tells Luffy, do you really think you're ready for this stage? And he says, straight up, no, you're not ready. No matter what you say, you can have no chance of beating me because, well, Aokiji is an admiral, and, well, the admirals are, well, pretty much some of the strongest people in the entire One Piece verse. So Aokiji would, of course, try to attack Luffy, using his powers of, his devil fruit. And as you would probably expect, this would about go as you would probably imagine. Really terribly, because immediately using Shunpo, obviously, Luffy would be able to dodge all of Aokiji's attacks that he would throw towards him, which would actually shock Aokiji because he wouldn't be able to understand how Luffy is so fast. And not only that, he's able to immediately realize that what Luffy is doing is not the CP9 technique, shave, where you kick 7 times fast to obviously get like a ridiculously quick speed boost. That he's doing something completely different, and that seems actually a little bit better than not Shunpo, but shave. And he would be kind of shocked to see Luffy has invented some other form of quick movement, kind of just being amazed by it, thinking, so this is Garp's grandson. Kind of amazed by this, but he's definitely got that Garp tangibles about him. Nonetheless, we would then see Aokiji keep trying to, tag Luffy using his observation haki, getting real close, but it's really not easy for him, as you have to remember that Luffy not only using Shunpo, but also is just way stronger than he was in the original timeline. Right now, if I had to give you an idea, I would say this Luffy is like Marineford levels of strength with Shunpo. So, yeah, pretty competent Luffy. And that's probably Luffy with Gear 2nd active at that point in the story. And this Luffy hasn't even invented Gear 2nd yet, so just keep that in mind. So Luffy's kind of just styling and wilding on Aokiji, but clearly, if it wasn't very obvious, just because I'm saying base Luffy is probably Marineford Gear 2nd speed, and I'm saying with Shunpo active, he's a little bit faster than that. Aokiji would obviously be able to eventually attack Luffy, and he would do a significant amount of damage, as Aokiji is not a bone. And this is when Luffy would realize that he won't be able to just keep dodging Aokiji over and over again. He keeps trying to dodge him to kind of, get an idea of how he, fights and does all that type of stuff. But this is when Luffy will quickly realize that instead of actually fighting an admiral, it actually might just be better to, after, taking that blow, to maybe just take him out of the equation. And one of the better ways for Luffy have to take some money, out of the equation, well, as you all know, Rukia has access to Kido. And what is Kido? It is special spells that the Soul Reapers use to do special things. So the first Kido that, of course, Luffy would try would obviously be none other than Sai, which basically locks the target's arms behind their back, restricting basic movement. And once Luffy uses this, Aokiji's arms would obviously be stuck behind his back. This will shock Aokiji, and once this happens, this is where we would then see Luffy do none other than, of course, armament haki enhanced Gum Gum Gatling attack at Aokiji, which Aokiji would immediately realize that he was actually feeling the attacks of Luffy, meaning Luffy must be using armament haki, which would shock him because he wouldn't expect a rookie pirate to be capable of using armament haki. This would obviously hurt Aokiji, as Luffy's not that weak, and not to mention the fact that I really haven't said anything, but Luffy obviously would also have access to spiritual pressure, because you can't do Kido without spiritual pressure, or spiritual energy. So ultimately, Luffy would have access to that as well. And I haven't really been mentioning it, but that's also one of the other main reasons why Luffy is so much more powerful than he normally would be as well. With all this being said, this would easily start damaging Aokiji significantly, as he would feel Luffy's blows. Of course, this is where he would start using observation haki. I'm going to assume Aokiji in future sight, that's what I'm going to be saying, to weave around these attacks. And obviously by deforming, it would actually break the Bakudo side, it would break the side. And with that happening, Aokiji would be able to reform behind Luffy. And this is when he would send a large ice attack towards the legs of Luffy, which he would just barely dodge using observation haki. Of course, Luffy would be shocked to see that Aokiji was able to break out of it by breaking his body completely down. And he wondered how he was even able to figure out where he was hitting for a second there, thinking if it was maybe some like evolution of, observation haki, kind of seeing into the future of what maybe he can do with it. But this is when Aokiji would side him and punch the crap out of Luffy with an armament haki enhanced punch. The punch that Aokiji had sent towards Luffy earlier was not nearly as strong as the one he just sent. I mean, imagine if Aokiji really, against Garp's grandson, somebody he's not really trying to take down, hit him with the full force of his attack on his first attack. That really doesn't seem friendly now, does it? So obviously, this is a much more powerful attack. We're not gonna be saying Aokiji goes out here, but it's significantly stronger. And once Luffy feels this punch, he's sent flying into like the four trees. And even though Luffy is taking significant damage here, he actually get up with a smile on his face. Aokiji would think that should have been enough to actually take Luffy out, but somehow the guy was still standing. This is when Aokiji thinks it'd probably be time to put him in like a time capsule, you know, completely freeze his body, what have you. So this is what he prepares to do. He's like, you can't win, kid. Although I have to admit, you're ridiculously strong for a rookie. And Luffy would say, yeah, you're ridiculously strong for an admiral, but gotta say, I kind of expected that much. As the two of them would rush at each other. And this is where we would see none other than Luffy say that he could use, you know, his other Bakudo or maybe even fire some auto attacks, but he would decide against both, as he would instead choose to call out it. For the first time in this what if, in an actual fight, he would call out Soto no Shirayuki, which of course is again Rukia's Blade's name, which is why it's the thumbnail title. Because I know somebody was asking me like, why is the thumbnail title Zoro no Shirayuki? Well, that's Rukia's Blade's name. It's her Zanbaito. So ultimately, he would draw on Soto no Shirayuki out of basically thin air, which would shock the crap out of like it would shock the crap out of Aokiji. And once that happens, this is where we would then see Luffy slash down at Aokiji. Now, if you guys are fully aware of the power of a Zanpakuto, it's a little bit stronger than the Soul Reaper if they're just fighting on their own. And obviously, it's literally like their soul. It's a part of them. So, yeah, when Luffy pulls this out and throws down his slash, it's extremely powerful. Not to mention the fact that Luffy also can somewhat control ice as well. As if you didn't know, the thing about Rukia is she does fire ice attacks, but her blade's actual Shikai, what it actually does is it actually basically allows her to control temperature. And what she actually does is she usually turns the temperature down to then wield it into using ice attacks. So it actually controls temperature, to be more specific. So what we see happen here is, of course, this would be a powerful attack from Luffy. And I'm just going to be saying it's probably like maybe Shirofune, where, you know, where Rukia like reforms the sword and basically it extends the length. I'm just gonna be saying he does that, but he does that with a slashing down attack. Also, because Rukia is like a master swordsman, obviously coming from the Soul Society, that information will be transferred to Luffy by this point. So Luffy's also a master swordsman and is actually spent some time training with his sword. Of course, Zoro never knew about this because when he sees the blade, he just thinks Luffy's a joke, as Luffy just twirls it around and throws it around. But obviously, he really is actually good with a sword. He just doesn't use it unless he absolutely has to. It's just the way he sees it. So, of course, this would send Aokiji flying backwards, as when Aokiji reforms this time, he would be shocked, to say the least, that Luffy was able to pull out a sword from nowhere, and it appears to have like a smooth ice coating around it, which was kind of shocking. He'd be kind of confused by how Luffy was even able to pull this, or how he was able to do this, as it's very clear that Luffy already had a Devil Fruit, so this wasn't a Devil Fruit ability unless Luffy had somehow managed to get two. But Aokiji would push it to the back of his head and say, my, you're a serious problem. It looks like it would be better if I were to take you out right here and right now. As Aokiji would try once again to get Luffy in a time capsule. But of course, this is when Luffy would be done, like, you know, playing games. And this is when he would release a Hakurin, which would basically be, again, where Rukia sends that giant ice wave at the opponent. And now Luffy would do that too. And by releasing a Hakurin, well, it was very clear to Aokiji who was the person who was actually responsible for taking out that Celestial Dragon all that time ago. You know, when he went to go investigate and stuff. Now, I didn't actually make it Aokiji again. I said at that point in time, it was really whoever you wanted to choose. I just made it Aokiji because he was somebody that I, you know, could get the ice out. But now, looking at it back, I think this is actually the perfect choice because Aokiji really wouldn't care that much. And on top of that, it's a really cool tie-in to this fight they're about to have right now. So anyways, Aokiji gets hit with the Hakurin and he's shocked. Now, of course, since Aokiji's body is made up of ice, this absolutely does nothing, but he's just shocked at the sheer amount of mass of power that, of course, Luffy can, you know, release from his attack. It's just insane. And it's even more powerful than when he used it all the way back then. So he's just shocked. And he realizes very quickly and remembers when he went to obviously go to Luffy's home island and the Goa Kingdom, and he remembers this giant ice wave, but this one is even more massive, clearly. And he's like, oh, so it was him. But Aokiji doesn't want to press charges against Luffy, as A, it's been too long, and B, Luffy must have been a kid when he did that. And he's also pretty sure after experiencing Luffy or being around him for a while, that Luffy's not really the type of person that would have done that unless it was something bad that the Celestial Dragon was going to do. And of course, lazy justice. So Aokiji easily breaks out of this because he literally is ice, and he commends Luffy for his tremendous power. And Luffy, being a little stupid, would obviously realize, should probably figured that wasn't going to be that effective, Well, Luffy decides to put up his Zanpakuto tail at this point, as it's not really going to help him here at all, since he's fighting somebody made of ice, and so his attacks aren't really going to be that effective at all. So what he more decides is that Aikido might actually be the way to go. And of course, Luffy would of course fire some Hado. He would fire a Bakurai, which is a pale lightning. It's basically like a pale lightning blast, and obviously it's a concentrated bolt of white lightning that they can fire from their fingertips, like the user can fire from them. And that's exactly what Luffy would do to Aokiji. I want to specify, so you actually know what's happening in case you've never watched Bleach. And this thing gets fired, and basically it would hit Aokiji, but because Aokiji is a Logia user, not Lugia user, I don't know what I was saying there, this will do absolutely nothing. This is when Luffy realized that all his other abilities that aren't Haki really aren't going to be that effective, because he doesn't know how to combine Haki with spiritual pressure yet. He doesn't know how to do that yet. Just a little foreshadowing there. Anyways, Luffy would of course decide that Haki is the only way to really go here, as all his other abilities, outside of maybe using like obviously using Bakudo, really won't be useful against Aokiji. And of course he thinks about using Bakudo against Aokiji, but he thinks, nah, I'd rather run this as fair as possible. So this starts a all-out grudge match, or it starts in an all-out grudge match for Luffy, where he's basically using Shunpo and basically just using his Haki and observation Haki to, battle the likes of Aokiji, while also using his Gum Gum Devil Fruit to try to do something against Aokiji, which it's actually being pretty effective. And I could actually see the two are actually going at it, even though Aokiji is clearly holding back still at this point, just shocked by how much power Luffy actually has, and acknowledging if Luffy was fighting literally anybody else with that power that he has, and even what he was just able to do with that lightning strike, where he was able to seemingly create lightning out of nowhere, Luffy would easily be capable of probably beating half the sea. He thinks he'd probably be capable of beating some Yonko. He doesn't even really know if Luffy would have, if he doesn't have the power to beat the other admirals, but he would remember that since they have Logias, Luffy would probably be struggling against them like he's struggling right now. And since he doesn't really have the Haki output to match, well, sadly, Luffy is still getting a little overwhelmed. Aokiji somehow, even though Luffy is overall more powerful than him, is still actually on the back foot, simply due to the fact that Aokiji is not only more experienced, but is also just incapable of taking damage from anything that's not Haki. So he just has a ridiculous advantage. Logias are broken unless you have elemental advantage or Haki. And of course, since Luffy's Haki is not that strong, I'm not going to be saying it's crazy. Like, he would have base armament at this point. And yet Luffy's stronger, so his attacks are stronger, and Haki is still being a really good conduit there. I'm still going to be saying ultimately they would draw. Yeah, Luffy does not come out the winner of this battle, but he doesn't come out a loser either. And Aokiji just decides that, okay, that's enough. I've seen enough, he would say. And Luffy would say, wait, what? You've seen enough? What does that mean? He says, it means I'm going to let you go. I owe your grandfather are dead, and frankly, your grandpa, and I really wasn't planning on taking you out anyways, so I'm just gonna let you go. Just keep in mind that if you want to progress on these seas, not only will you need to learn how to get more control over Haki, which would shock Luffy that he was able to pick up when he was using it, but Aokiji would say, obviously I'm an admiral, obviously I can use it too, and obviously you're gonna need to improve on that if you really have any chance of conquering these seas. Although, I would want to question you about all the other stuff I saw, and an event that happened a couple years ago, but it's too much work. I'll leave you to be, but don't cause too much trouble, otherwise I will have to take you down, boy. As, of course, Aokiji would just walk off. And with this being said, Zoro and Sanji would come back to see if Luffy was okay, and that would be the end to Long Ring Long Land, and the end to Luffy versus Aokiji, which is probably one of the longest Luffy versus Aokiji fights. But yeah, I just see that it needed to be, because it's just pretty much the most interesting fight that's gonna probably happen in the entire What If. Maybe, especially for a while anyways. So with that being said, the crew is happy that Robin's safe, and Robin never got, turned into an ice capsule, so she's fine. And with that being said, Robin would be shocked that Luffy was actually able to go toe-to-toe with Aokiji, because she knows firsthand just how strong Aokiji is. Anyways, the crew makes their way to Water 7. Usopp doesn't fight Luffy in this timeline because, well, that would just be really stupid. He knows how strong Luffy is. Luffy just made his way out of a battle with an admiral and was practically perfectly fine. And not only that, he just isn't really going to treat Luffy that way in this timeline because he feels as though everybody on the crew is, and I usually use this reasoning all the time, since Usopp in the main timeline, the reason he wanted to fight Luffy was because he felt like he was insignificant compared to everybody else on the crew. He'd be feeling okay with everybody on the crew simply due to the fact that since Luffy is so broken, he usually is the one that mainly takes down most of the enemies and does most of the heavy lifting for the crew. Zoro, Sanji, they don't feel like ridiculously so above him, so Usopp just wouldn't see the need to fight Luffy. And with that being said, there would be no crew dynamic panic right here either. And when this whole shenanigans with like Robin and Iceberg and all this stuff comes out and stuff like that, when CP9 tries to take Robin by force at this point, well, not by force or whatever, but Robin tries to go with them. Obviously, CP9 would try to stop the Straw Hats from pursuing them or whatever, trying to take Robin. But yeah, that wouldn't happen at all. Luffy's just way too strong. Like using Shunpo, he would very easily defeat the likes of Rob Lucci, defeat Kaku. Like Zoro wouldn't even have to fight him. Like all of CP9, they might all try. They'll all get defeated very easily. Luffy's way too strong for them. And since they don't have Logias or anything crazy, and I don't even really think CP9 members at this point have the hockey, they would just get sent flying out of the building like they did Luffy in the original and Zoro, of course. And once this happens, Robin would eventually get to the point where she's like, just let me go. I'm just going to be a burden. And my favorite scene happens. And Luffy says, no, you won't. You're my friend. And I want you to stay with us forever and all that cool stuff. And when Robin sees just how much Luffy genuinely means that and that nothing can really hurt him. And honestly, just seeing the reality that he was actually able to hold his own against the Admiral, Aokiji, and Aokiji, who she knows how powerful he is, she would genuinely think that, yeah, Luffy can keep that promise. And she would be convinced by Luffy to eventually say, I want to live in Water 7 this time. So what that means is any lobby never happens and Robin never gets taken from Water 7. Because of this means that Luffy never fights Kobe and he never fights Helmeppo because the Straw Hats, well, the Going Merry is still damaged, so they would still have to wait around before Iceberg and Frankie to fix it. But not fix it, but to make them a new ship, which would be the Thousand Sunny. So they still have to wait for that. But other than that, they wouldn't really do anything else. The CP9 members would be destroyed and all that cool stuff. Now, how Frankie gets involved in this is I'm just going to be saying Frankie would attempt to take the money from Usopp, but considering Usopp won't be nearly as injured because they really didn't play in the long ring games, so on and so forth. Unless Usopp was actually fine and then he got injured after that, which I think is actually what happened. So yeah, but Luffy was with him and that just didn't happen. And this ends up, and then Frankie ends up trying to attack them, Straw Hats. But that doesn't work out because Luffy's too strong and he easily defeats Frankie. And Frankie respects the Straw Hats now. And of course, that would eventually lead Frankie to actually deciding that Luffy could become the Pirate King. So he wants to help Iceberg make Luffy the Thousand Sunny to, fulfill Tom's, prophecy, destiny, all that good stuff. And of course, eventually Frankie would be convinced to join the Straw Hats. In the main timeline, this was simply due to the fact that Frankie had a bounty. What I'm going to be saying here is because he wants to see his ship reach the end of the Grand Line, which I'm pretty sure is Frankie's dream. So yeah, I don't think it'd be that hard to convince him. So yeah, Frankie joins. The Straw Hats leave early here, and they're on their way to Thriller Bark with CP9 being defeated, Robin being saved with ease. Basically, like the first day any of this happens, it's already over. And just like that, this we would then see, of course, the Straw Hats make it to Thriller Bark, where they would immediately run into Brook, and Brook would tell Luffy that yes, he'll join his crew, and Luffy would ask. He also asks to, of course, iconically see Nami's panties, where she would kick him in the head. After this happens, the Straw Hats would then obviously go to try to get Brook's shadow back. And I say try to because it wouldn't take too long for this whole arc to be finished, because as you guys remember, as Luffy was just walking around in the island, Moria was like, there's like a ridiculous bounty on my island. Which, by the way, I'm just going to be saying Luffy's bounty is the same as it is in canon by this point, which I'm pretty sure is just over 100,000. It might be 200. I said 100,000. I did it again. 200 million. I'm pretty sure it's over 200 million, right? By this point. So we're just going to be saying Luffy has like a 200 million berry bounty. And basically, Gekkomore's like, a 200 million berry bounty on my island? No way! And he's like basically trying to like take Luffy's like bounty as how powerful he is, which it's not. The bounty is clearly wrong. It should literally be like a Yonko's bounty. It should be like 1 billion berries or something like that. So yeah, no, that bounty is very misleading. Luffy's current bounty is 3 billion. So if I had to say, it should be like 3 billion right now. Yes, I'm saying Luffy's Yonko level like right now. I mean, he just had an extreme fight with an admiral, and the admiral's extreme fight Yonkos. So clearly that's not misleading at all. Anyways, Gecko Mori's like, I'm gonna take your shadow. But before Gecko Mori even knows what's going on, Luffy, not liking any of this, would use Riju. Oh my god, I suck. Riju Koro, which is basically the 6-rod light prism, which basically summons 6 beams of glowing light that strike, Gecko Moria and paralyzing, all their physical movements entirely. So Luffy uses this on Gecko Moria, and yeah, he's just stunned by these, and he's like, "What the heck is this? I thought the devil fruit was gum gum fruit or something." And Luffy would say, "It is, but I can also do this too." And this is when Luffy would pull out his Sanpakuto, and he would use Hakurin to completely freeze Gecko Moria. And once that happens and Gecko Moria is defeated, all the shadows would obviously go back to their original host, and everybody would be happy, and they throw up like a giant party for Luffy, and they say how cool he is, and obviously Brook would get his shadow back. Zoro would still beat his ancestor. He would still beat Ryuma because, yeah, that's just cool. And Sanji would still save Nami from, kind of forgot his name, but yeah, him. And I don't actually forgot his name. It's just I don't really know how to pronounce it. It's what I actually want to say. But yeah, Sanji still does his thing. Usopp still beats Perona. These things still happen, but I'm just saying they like get their shadows back way faster. So Oars never happens because they Gecko Moria never takes Luffy's shadow. So with all that being said, Thriller Bark is over. They leave. Brook joins the crew. It's awesome. And the Straw Hats make their way to Sabaody Archipelago. Before that, they fight the Flying Fisherman Riders. They meet Cammy. They re-meet Hashan. Nami forgives him. And all that stuff happens. Sanji kicks the leader of the Flying Fisherman Riders pretty again. And they make their way to Sabaody now. And once they get to Sabaody Archipelago, they eventually reach Shaki's room. Shaki's bar, not room. And basically Shaki's like, "Oh, you guys must want to get your ship coated to, go to the place." After Chopper, tries to, get sad over Shaki saying you have to pay for the cotton candy, but she was just playing. Anyways, that basically leads them to go back into the town because she tells them that Riley can be gone for like who knows how long, which that is very true. So obviously they make their way back to the grounds to see, well, where is he? So it becomes very clear to them very fast that it's not going to be that easy. But eventually this will lead Luffy and the others to eventually run back into the rest of the Straw Hats, or we would see Nami trying to use all the money she can to buy back Cammy, who has been pretty much captured and almost about to be put into slavery. But just before it can happen, this is where we would see none other than Charlos bid enough money to obviously win Cammy, because she's like, "Man, what's the hype with this little mermaid girl? I'm so happy." And of course, this will lead Luffy to getting mad and thinking, "No, that's not gonna happen." And obviously Charlos is like a bum, and he shoots Hachan, and Hachan's like, "No, Luffy, don't do it. Don't do it." Now, if it wasn't very clear to you, this version of Luffy is a little different than my other Luffys that I do give Haki, because most of them actually can use Conqueror's Haki. But this version of Luffy, by this point, actually cannot use Conqueror's Haki. He's still just base armament, base observation. But I haven't mentioned it, but yes, Luffy did gain Gear 2nd and Gear 3rd by this point. So yeah, he did learn those after his battle with Aokiji, as he was just like, "Yeah, I need to get stronger, no doubt." And Luffy still does train. I know I haven't mentioned it, but yeah, he does. Obviously, he wants to make sure he become the strongest pirate he can to protect his friends. And he realized that by fighting Aokiji, and he just knew deep down that Aokiji was holding back. So he just knows that he had to get stronger. So he will continue to keep doing that, even if I don't mention it. So anyway, with this happening, Isuru would then see Luffy use, of course, because there are better ways to do this than just, attack the Celestial Dragon, as he doesn't want anything bad to happen. So what he would obviously do is he would use a Geki, which completely paralyzes a target, which is Bakudo number 9, just to be specific, and it would completely paralyze Charlos from shooting his gun. And once that happens, Luffy would think about punching him. Obviously, Luffy would probably still punch. Actually, since I said this is basically canon Luffy, no, it's not just canon Luffy. He has dragons training in him. So he would know that punching the Celestial Dragon is stupid, but seeing what it just did, I'm kind of 50-50 on if I want to make Luffy. It doesn't change anything. Luffy punches Charlos after doing that, after he stuns him, or farms on him by stunning him, and he just slams him, and he gets hit flying out of the building, not getting knocked into a wall, because Luffy doesn't hold anything back. If he's going to punch him, I'm going to make Luffy punch him out of the building. So that dude Charlos gets hit into the ocean, and immediately his guards, they're like, "Oh man, we gotta go help Charlos." So everybody, after seeing the Celestial Dragon gets punched out of the building, they're furious. They're losing their minds, they're going insane. So, anyways, everybody else gets up out of there, and Cammy is saved, of course, thanks to Rayleigh's Conqueror's Haki. Once this happens, we would then see all the events take place until the Straw Hats are, as you would probably expect, about to get attacked by Kizaru, which still would happen. And Kizaru would obviously want to take them out, for they are the crew that is responsible for sending a Celestial Dragon, not just punching him, but sending him into the ocean. So this would start Kizaru versus Luffy. And I really wanted to say that this battle would be some giant spectacle, which it could be, but it's not going to, because if you don't know, by the time Luffy got here second, he had basically already learned CP9's shave. And by just watching them do it a couple of times, Luffy was pretty much able to replicate that with Gear Second. And guess what? Luffy has Gear Second, and he has Shumpo to add onto it to make it even faster, and Luffy has gotten even stronger. So because of that, he's actually probably as fast as Kizaru is, even though Kizaru is made out of light. So what that tells me, and because Luffy's armament haki and observation haki got, a little bit better, Luffy would be able to fight Kizaru pretty evenly. I mean, he can fight Aokiji, who's pretty relative to him, even if he moves at the speed of light. Then yeah, I don't think Luffy with all these amps wouldn't be fast enough to keep up with Kizaru. So yeah, Gear Second, Luffy's actually able to easily still make Kizaru, and it actually just shocks him. He's like, what the heck's going on? And of course, I didn't mention this earlier, but Luffy also learned, which obviously you would think he would have thought about this, but Luffy pulls out his Shiro no Shirayuki and imbues it with armament haki, which he figured out how to do. So Luffy even figured out how to actually use a mission, because if you didn't know this, Zoro's when he emits haki into his blades in part, and after post time skip, Zoro's already learned the basics of emission. But of course, these are the basics of emission, so it's not like point blank emission, like where you can send haki through. That's advanced emission, but this is like base emission. So basically, Luffy knows how to do that too. So when he learns, or when he gets to 1-up, he's gonna have an easier time, learning that whole thing. But of course, this is where we would see Kizaru go up against the likes of Luffy. And although everything would actually be looking a little tough for him, this is when it become pretty clear that Luffy was the one on top, simply due to Luffy actually just being maybe even just a tad bit faster than Kizaru. But Kizaru would obviously have better armament and observation haki, and obviously has a Logia Devil Fruit, so Luffy has to be very careful with that. And of course, as this high, difficult, extreme diff battle is taking place, the rest of the Straw Hats, well, although I'm going to be saying that they're maybe a little bit stronger than the original timeline to try to keep up with Luffy, they really wouldn't be in the match for the pacifistas. And slowly but surely, Luffy's crew would start getting sent away by Kuma while he's preoccupied with Kizaru. And eventually, Luffy would have nobody on his crew left. And just as you would expect, this is where we would see Kuma send Luffy to Amazon Lily eventually. And with that happening, this would be the end to Sabaody Archipelago, or at least the first round, as we would then see, of course, Luffy on Amazon Lily. Now, my Amazon Lily parts, I usually go into depth about them and what have you, but literally, when I say this, I'm so serious. Nothing changes in Amazon Lily. Luffy meets Boa, she falls for him, she takes him to Impel down to save Ace, he learns about that. And in fact, I'm not even going to cover Ace versus Blackbeard, because although Ace learned haki earlier in this timeline, similar to Luffy, it was only base armament and base observation. It wasn't like he learned advanced conquerors or anything. So he wasn't like some insane haki master early on. Of course, he was stronger with haki, way stronger than the main timeline, I would say, even, but he wasn't some insane level. In fact, I wouldn't even say he had conqueror's coding, even by this fight. But his his armaments and observation were insane, but they would still be base. But so yeah, it's still an extreme diff fight with Blackbeard. And yes, Ace almost clutches it out thanks to his haki being extremely good, but he still would lose, is what I'm going to say. So Luffy would get on a train, he had his way to Impel Down, and as you would probably imagine, this is where we would see Luffy, as he would easily go through the entire castle after that whole Boa section with him hiding under her clothes and him getting into like the security room. And Luffy would tell Hancock he'll be fine, he won't get hurt. She wouldn't really believe that, but he would tell her that to keep her head in mind. And although he does promise Hancock that he's not going to get into any trouble, which Luffy won't, because he's just gonna easily get through everything. So Luffy, he gets off the floor, he gets in there, he's wondering about how he should go about this. Well, Luffy pulls out his Soro no Shirayuki and realizes that the best way to actually go about this would probably just to be to just destroy all the floors that are in his way and just go straight down. So, of course, he uses first dance to Shikari. Oh my god, I suck at these names. Hopefully I'm saying this right. I haven't heard this name in a while, and I need to probably reverse Bleach, but I think it's Tuseki Shiryu, which basically is when Rukia, I'm pretty sure you know what I'm talking about, draws a circle around her, and basically it frees everything, inside and out, erupting into like a pillar of ice. I know you know what I'm talking about, so I'm sorry if I'm like messing up the name. I'm pretty sure she says this to Shikakuro, but yeah. So anyways, but what I'm going to be saying is Luffy uses this on the stairs, and he makes a pillar going straight down. And he just keeps slashing through every floor until he just breaks his way all the way to the bottom. And once he gets there, first of all, I just want to clarify, Luffy is doing most of this way faster than the main timeline. He's just realizing things way faster. Things are happening a little bit faster. And not only that, I'm just going to be saying, this would be even before Garp could even get there to talk to Ace in the first place, actually. Garp hasn't even got there to talk to Ace. That's how much earlier Luffy is in this timeline. So Luffy comes in there, sees Ace shackled up, he sees Jinbei, and obviously immediately Luffy would unleash a Haruken on the bars, and he would break them, freezing them, breaking them, as he would then use his Soro no Shirayuki to easily break the chains off of Ace, freezing them and then destroying them with his sword. And he would do the same for Jinbei because, well, Jinbei's his pal. And of course, Jinbei and Ace would be shocked by everything that's happening right here, because clearly this is not normal at all. Luffy should not be able to do this, but Ace just knows how powerful Luffy is, and he's not, against what's happening. I mean, he definitely is, but he's like, well, he knows that Luffy's special, and has some special things going on. So ultimately, he doesn't want his brother to be in this situation, but he's thankful that Luffy was able to come and save him. Anyways, once this happens, this is where we then see that crazy jailbreak, as Luffy would now have to escort both Ace and Jinbei out of here. So as they all get, running and stuff, this is where we will see Evangelion head them off, as she's just getting all these prison sirens going off. And of course, as Luffy's going by, Ace would obviously tell Luffy that it'd probably be better if we just start this gigantic jailbreak. That way, it would distract Evangelion as much as possible. So they do. And as it happens, Buggy gets let loose. All these people kind of just get let loose. All the people you would probably expect, Crocodile, just name them, you imagine. And as all this happens, this is where we would then see Sengoku get word that Impel Down has been raided and Ace has been freed, along with Jinbei and some of the more serious threats. And as Sengoku's hearing about this, the name that he hears about first is Luffy. And of course, this is where he's like, Garp, it's your family again! As Garp's like, that boy! And that happens. Basically, that's the end of pretty much Impel Down, as Evangelion would run into Luffy, and Luffy would meet him with a Haruken. And that's the end of that, as Evangelion is frozen solid, and they dip. And basically, that means Crocodile escapes, and everybody just escapes the island. They all escape. And yeah, that's the end to Impel Down. Marine forward in this timeline, Luffy's too OP, so it just never happens. And because of that, that's the end of that. So what happens here is Luffy on his ship with Jinbei, I'm going to be saying. And yeah, that's pretty much it. It's just him, Ace, and Jinbei. They make their way back to Amazon Lily. Boa says she has clearance to stay there. She says Ace does too. Rayleigh, he's going to swim over there to Amazon Lily because that's where he expects Luffy to be, because that's what Shaki says, and she has foresight. And because Rayleigh also knew that's where to look to anyway, so in the original, so he goes there for that reason. He offers to train Ace and Luffy. Jinbei says that he's going to join the Straw Hats, but he's going to go back to Fishman Island and make sure everything's cool there. And that's the end to pre-time skip One Piece. I'm just going to be saying that Luffy with Rayleigh, they do go. So Ace does live in this timeline. I want to point that out. And I do want to say that Luffy would probably go like to Marine Ford, just the ore farm, do the whole 3D 2Y thing. So his crew would know. Everybody would be like, is that still Luffy, the guy who freed Ace from before this whole thing even happened? Sort of deal. And they all start looking at him, taking pictures. And of course that happens. And of course the Marines being there, they'd be like, this is the HQ. They try to do something to Luffy. Doesn't work. Rayleigh's there. And of course, once this all happens, Luffy and them dip. And once they dip, of course, everybody on the crew would know they gotta train. And of course, everybody in the crew got sent to the same places as in the main timeline. And remember, the crew's a little bit stronger, so they would be getting, a tad bit stronger even after this. So again, Ace, Luffy trained with Rayleigh on not Amazon Lily, but the island right next to Amazon Lily would be Wasakai now. And of course, this makes Ace and Luffy way stronger. This is where I'm going to be saying both Luffy and Ace actually learn advanced conquerors and actually learn how to use their conqueror sakis. The reason why I say they both learn advanced conquerors is because I feel like Rayleigh would think, since they already have a ridiculously good knowledge over observation armament, he wouldn't teach him a mission or a future sight. He would say, you guys can hone those later, but he would really focus on their conqueror's haki here to make their haki even, better. Clearly that's the big amplifier right there. That's what makes Yonkos. Now, obviously you can't train advanced conquerors, but what he would do is, since he knows Luffy and Ace both have it, is he would have them keep fighting each other over and over again. And since you can only train advanced conquerors with another conqueror's user, well, there we go. There's two, so there that goes. And once that happens, they're busted. And with that being said, Luffy during this time period would become even more OP. He would learn more about himself. He would learn more about Zoro's Shirayuki, and he learned a nice little extra thing that would scare everybody and would shake the island. I'm sure you know what this is if you have any idea, but Luffy would only use this as a last resort, extreme deal sort of deal. But yeah, he figures out some crazy stuff about his Zanpakuto himself and all that stuff. And obviously his haki gets stronger, his spiritual pressure gets stronger. And also, Luffy figures out how to, at this point, combine haki and spiritual pressure. So, good luck, everybody else in the verse, because this story is officially pretty much over. As I will cover the next events and mainly rapid succession, as unless there's something interesting that happens, there's really no point in covering it. So, anyways, the 2 years come to an end. Boa escorts Luffy back to Sabaody. Their ship is already coded thanks to Rayleigh leaving early. The Straw Hats gather like you would expect. They're all happy to see each other, like, woo, yay, it's Robin, Nami, Sanji, Zoro, you guys look so cool. And once that all happens, the Straw Hats depart with some help from Boa and everybody else that helped them over the 2 years. They make the Fisherman Island. Luffy meets Shirahoshi. The bum, known as Hody Jones, tries to cause problems, but Hody is a bum and he gets beat by Zoro. And yeah, so when he tries to fight Luffy, he gets hit with a hurricane, and that's the end of Hody, and that's the end of Fisherman Island. So yeah, that's basically what happens. And once that's done, Jinbei's not revealed to be there, so they leave, and that's where we would then get to Punk Hazard, where Caesar Clown would be. And other than that, Caesar Clown is, outside of saving the kids, Caesar Clown is like the biggest thing. Luffy meets Smoker again. He gets Harukened. I don't really know what to tell you. Law obviously wants to join Luffy, as his bounty is like way bigger than in the main timeline by this point. I'm going to be saying Luffy's bounty is like 700 million. And the reason for that is because he wanted to impel down solo and freed Ace and Jinbei and made it out alive and went back to Marineford to Ora Farm. So yeah, and over the 2 years, I'm going to be saying that just skyrocketed from maybe like 500 million to 700 million because they really want his head. So yeah, Luffy has like a 700 million berry bounty, and Law's like, yeah, I'm not passing up on a chance to team up with you. So he decides to team up with Luffy, and that's where their alliance forms. And that obviously means Law loses his warlord status once the government gets wind of it, because he's associating with a crazy, ridiculous criminal. Once that happens, this is where the Straw Hats would then make their way to, of course, because Caesar gets defeated with ease. And yeah, this is where they would make their way to Dressrosa. And at Dressrosa, everything would go like you would probably expect. Luffy, except the main thing that usually changes here, Sabo would be here, but he would already know Luffy and Ace and stuff because, well, he didn't lose his memories and stuff. And on top of that, he would just, be ready to talk to Luffy. So nothing crazy like that. And there would be no tournament because Ace didn't die, so there's no tournament for his fruit either. So, of course, as Luffy gets there, there's none of that stuff going on. So Luffy can just go straight for Doflamingo. So obviously Luffy, using Shimpo, easily gets to the place. They don't even do disguises because there's no point in doing disguises. They just trust that Luffy can defeat Doflamingo with ease. So as Luffy Shimpos, reaches the top, reaches Doffy's castle, he just walks right into his room, I'm going to be saying. And Doffy is like, Straw Hat, I've been waiting on you. It does seem like you just appear in rooms. Your speed is quite interesting. What kind of technique is that? And Luffy would say, none of your business. Hey, you're causing a lot of problems, Luffy would say. And our alliance is made to defeat you and to eventually defeat Kaido. And of course, Doflamingo would start laughing and think, "You want to fight that monster? You've lost it." This is when Doflamingo would obviously try to fight Luffy, which would result in him instantly losing, as of course Luffy would be playing no games, as obviously he would of course activate Bakudo 61 Rijokuro, which would be the 6-rod light prison once more, which would obviously stop Doflamingo from doing absolutely anything. And once that happens, this is when Luffy would of course use I was gonna be saying he uses like a elephant gun and amplifies him to elephant gun with of course spiritual pressure, and he slams that into Doflamingo, who can't really do anything. He's stuck in like, well, of course, a 6-rod light prison, as he is just sent flying into the sea. And Doflamingo gets one shot because Luffy is not only stronger, more powerful, and fatally, because he has spiritual pressure, he's just so much more powerful than everybody. On top of having like top-notch hockey, and the funny thing is that punch Luffy just threw into like Delphi, that wasn't even a freaking, like, it wasn't even a Conqueror's Coding punch, right? That was just armament, elephant gun, plus spiritual pressure. I would say like maybe 40% spiritual pressure. And that was showing up to send him flying out of the building and instantly defeat Delphi in one attack. So yeah, Luffy instantly beats Delphi, and that just pretty much crashes everything else. The Straw Hats battle, you know who they battle, they leave early to go to Zoe, I mean. And you know everybody who left, like Nami and them, they left early. And once that happens, this pretty much brings the end to Dressrosa, which actually, because Dressrosa ends so fast, the crew, my bad, they don't even leave early because there's no point, because they don't have a point to split up, because Dressrosa is instantly over. They learned about all the stuff going on there though, because they had to spend their time there a couple of days. I think they spent like maybe an extra 2 days there, but they don't split up because there's no need, because it's basically over as soon as they get there. And once it's over, there's word that Delphi lost. This increases Luffy bounty to 750 million. Fujitora brings down the building on the Warlord system, and that's pretty much all that matters here that happens in Dressrosa, and the Straw Hats will leave for Zao altogether this time. And that basically means the Straw Hats will save everybody in Zao, because Luffy's there. It's bad for the Kaido. It's bad for the Beast Pirates. They don't do anything. None of the Beast Pirates have any chance. Luffy, with the help of Zoro and Sanji, they just make no effort on any of this. And when, of course, Big Mom's forces come to try to get Sanji to go to the tea party, join it or not, Zeph gets it. Luffy just unleashes Conqueror's Haki on all of them, knocks them all out, and says if Big Mom wants Sanji, she better come herself to get him. And of course, because Sanji tells Luffy that was not the thing to do, and this is going to become a serious problem, this is when Luffy says, I'll go to Whole Cake Island right now, and we can go together and just beat up Big Mom. And Nami, hearing this, would think he's kind of crazy, but she knows how strong her captain is, and would actually tell him that, yeah, actually, me, you, and Sanji, we actually probably go do that if you really want to. I know how strong you are, and I'm not a liability, so you need a navigator. So, I mean, maybe that actually wouldn't be a terrible idea. It would get another Warlord off, it would get another Yonko off our tails if you actually think you're strong enough to beat her. And obviously Luffy would say, yeah, I should have no problem. Never really fought a Yonko before or anything like that, but couldn't be that tough, right? So of course this would lead a small group, which would just be Nami, Sanji, and Luffy, to go to fight the Yonko Big Mom. And of course, once they arrive on the island together, being a little bit different, as Sanji wasn't arriving here, in the original timeline, with them, he was already here because he already set to go to protect the Straw Hats. That's not what's happening here. And of course, what that ends up leading to is, as they go forward, this is when Big Mom was sent Cracker once again, because obviously she knows that Luffy was able to defeat the likes of Delphi, so sending Cracker makes the most sense. Cracker gets one shot and sent into her building, just like in the main timeline. I was going to say Luffy hits him with the elephant gun, sends him flying all the way back to the castle. And Big Mom's like, no way, Cracker, who could have possibly defeated you? And whatnot. Obviously it was Luffy. And as they make their way forward, there is nothing that can stop Luffy from completely trampling over absolutely everybody that stands in his way. He is just way too strong, way too powerful, way too fast, and way too capable. There's no one that can truly challenge him at this point and out of these levels of characters. So eventually he gets into Big Mom's castle and he tells Big Mom to stop. You're not going to get Sanji at your stupid little tea party. You might as well just give up while you're ahead. And Big Mom hears this and starts laughing her, laugh. And she tells Luffy, "Oh, so you came here personally to tell me no? Well, you must have a death wish." As Big Mom would get up and start unleashing her Conqueror's Haki. And of course, this is where she would get Zeus and Protagoras. And obviously, she would try to attack Luffy. As this would begin Big Mom versus Luffy. And by Big Mom versus Luffy, I mean Luffy activates Gear Force. He imbues his arm with tons of spiritual pressure, dodges all of Big Mom's attacks, and then uses a giant King Kong gun, slams Big Mom in the face with it, one-shotting her, sending her flying out of the building with his strongest attack, max spiritual pressure, and obviously using Conqueror's coding on top of that, instantly one-shotting Big Mom and defeating her. But to her point, to one shot or to defeat Big Mom in this way, Luffy had to go all out and now is extremely tired. So this is the first person in the story that has actually made Luffy tired after a fight, because even Aokiji didn't do that because they weren't actually going all out, or they didn't go to the death. But in this situation, Luffy knew right off rip that this was not a joke, because his observation haki and his ability to sense people's natures were amplified. And obviously, he knew that if he was going to be Yonko, he should go all out. So Luffy's a little bit tired after this, but nothing he can't handle, as he recovers, pretty relatively quickly. Or again, Luffy is so much stronger than everybody else that these people who would probably give him a little bit of troubles here aren't going to give him that much trouble here at all, really. Katakuri would try to do something, but unlike their iconic battle in the original timeline, that just doesn't happen here. As when Katakuri uses his future sight to predict Luffy's movements, Luffy's already heard about it from Rayleigh, but he just doesn't know how to do it. And frankly, Luffy's like, oh, so he must be using future sight, just like Aokiji did. Luffy had told that to Rayleigh, and Rayleigh was like, that's probably what happened, because he would bring it up because that was like, seriously, since he's been on the seas, his toughest fight yet. And of course, this is where Luffy would be like, oh, so that must be what he's doing too. But since Luffy's just so much faster than Katakuri, he would just like wait for his stamina to really come back after beating Big Mom, and obviously he would defeat Katakuri. And once Kat and Big Mom are done, that is really it for the Big Mom pirates. They start losing it and running away. They're losing it. The fact that their mom just lost and Katakuri just lost, they've lost all composure. Big Mom pirates are finished. The Marines, they're trying to raid the territory, take advantage of this as the little Straw Hat ship escapes, which would be Nami, Sanji, and Luffy, as they make their way to Wano, where the rest of the crew have already made their way there. So this starts off Wano. And of course, since Big Mom was just defeated and probably getting sent to jail, and because Big Mom was also defeated by Luffy, and Kat was also defeated by Luffy, this would mean Luffy's bounty is probably 4.5 billion berries. And I say 4.5 billion berries because A, he just beat a Yonko. 2, he just went there personally to beat a Yonko, and he did it basically with no help. And he just beat a Yonko and a Yonko's right hand at the same time, pretty much. So with all this being said, this will leave Rayleigh with a smile on his face as he would start to laugh at the news he's reading, with Shaki having a smile on her face, and the rest of the world just react to it as you would probably expect, with shock and disbelief that a Yonko was defeated by basically just one guy, and also her right hand. So once that's all done, this is where we would then see Luffy appear on Wano. And as usual, all the normal Wano stuff happens. The crew does a little disguise thing. Not me, Sanji show up, put on some disguises. They all want to be in disguise. Luffy doesn't really think disguises matter because he doesn't really think he'll have that much of a problem with Kaido based off how he just did Big Mom. But he did know he had to use a lot of power, and Big Mom was, she was tough. So, of course, also, Zeus was taken by Nami because she would offer him clouds, and Zeus would see the clouds, and he would realize that, Big Mom's cooked. So Nami still got Zeus. I just wanted to add that in because why not? And Sanji never meets Pudding. I just want to throw that in too because he doesn't, and I actually think Pudding was who I think is actually his canonical ending, but whatever, wife or whatever. But yeah, so he doesn't meet her here. So this timeline it might be Viola, whatever. So of course this would lead to that event coming where Luffy thinks Kaido killed his whole crew, and just like always in my what ifs, this is where Luffy would fight Kaido, and this will pretty much be their battle of battles. Now, the thing is, in most of my what ifs, this is where I usually have the timeline somewhat catch up, right? This is where I normally say Luffy somewhat has a check. He somehow has a check and balance. This is where it somewhat happens, right? This is where we would see Luffy probably get Joy Boy and go Gear 5 and all that wonderful stuff happen. But the funny thing is, is Rukia is so overpowered. And because Luffy has gained so much of a power, you're going to see that in a second, this is not actually where a check and balance happens at all. So Kaido begins to fight with Luffy, and he immediately realizes that Luffy should easily start reaching into his top 6, or his top 5, my bad, as Luffy already has Conqueror's Coding, and he's pretty much slowly but surely already mastered Conqueror's Coding to his many battles with Ace. And Kaido at this point is only helping him to refine it. And of course, as this is happening, he's like, oh, this kid is serious. This kid is Yonko level. His bounty, Yonko. He really is on that status. He's not just some joke. So as Kaido is slowly realizing this, and as their battle progresses, pretty much, ooh, excuse me if you actually heard that. I don't know if you heard that. But downtown Wano, which is where they were at this point, I can't remember the actual city, is just getting destroyed. It's like a war. It's a war there. Luffy's crew is just watching this, and they're not actually dead. And honestly, it's just a sight to see. It's just destruction all over the place. Everything's going to absolutely get destroyed. It's just carnage everywhere. And obviously, this is where the final battle is going to happen, because there's not going to be any Onigashima. They're not going to get there because Kaido realizes just how much of a problem Luffy is, and he just realizes, oh no, this guy is like Odin. I need to eliminate him as fast as possible. So Kaido goes Dragon Form, and they're just throwing attacks at each other. Luffy's using Hurricane. Luffy's using his Shurigi, which is obviously like the ice pillar technique. He's using his Zanpakuto Toe. He's using Zoro no Shirayuki, and he's obviously doing Haki into it. And they are just clashing over and over again. Luffy using his Shikai, which is, the form of the sword that, is used the most. And basically, he's using it to control the temperature. He's trying to cool down Kaido. He's trying to get him cool, freeze his scales, make him colder as he just lands attack after attack. And Luffy's powerful Conqueror's Haki on top of his spiritual pressure is making him way more powerful than Kaido in this instance. He's way more powerful than Kaido. But because Luffy is a human boy, wielding soul reaper powers in his base body, as I said earlier in the what if, which is not really come up, but is coming up now because he's fighting an opponent who's actually pushing him to that limit. This cannot be sustained for long. It's just that the thing is, nobody's actually pushed Luffy to the point where sustaining it was ever really a problem. Because Luffy either just one-shots you or he's just so much above you, it's not really important. But here, it's important because Luffy's in a stamina battle, as Kaido can somewhat still hold on even with Luffy's immense power. As Luffy's going 100% spiritual pressure, using as much Haki output as possible, and is also using his abilities to the max here. And as we see all this happen, this is just not working out for Luffy, as he's slowly reaching his limit, as his body just can't handle the spiritual pressure and the Haki output he's wielding. And as Luffy's slowly about to burn out, this is when Luffy realizes that he's going to have to use that if he's going to go and win this battle. Now, what you guys might be wondering is, what are you talking about? Well, if you guys remember correctly, I told you Luffy found something out scary about himself and his soul, and basically Satoshi no Shirayuki, when he was training with Rayleigh and Ace in Wasakaino. And that's actually where we're going to be bringing that up right now, as Luffy realized if he wants to win, if he wants to avenge his crew, who he still thinks is dead at this point, and actually defeat Kaido, he will have to use that power. And what power would that be? Well, as Kaido would think he actually has Luffy on the run. It looks like Luffy's about to run out of power. This is when we would hear a word. Kai. Final release. Hake no Togame. White Haze Punishment. And just like that, this is when we would then see an ice crown and Luffy's hair turn white, as we would see Luffy get into a king's clothing of white silk ice covering his body, as Luffy would get into a king's royal attire, as we would see a king's crown come over his head. And slowly but surely, it would be in that moment that, of course, we would see Luffy's blade become transparent ice, and its area of effect expands to about absolute zero. And of course, anything within the vicinity of Luffy, spiritual pressure is frozen instantly, and the foes Luffy strikes are flash frozen and shatter into dust. That is, of course, Rukia's Hake no Togame, White Haze Punishment. And that is just what Luffy activated, which of course is very dangerous, because if Luffy for a second messes this up, his whole body could shatter. And just like that, Luffy unleashes it, his Bonkai. And just like that, that's the end of this fight, as Kaido is dead. Kaido is dead. He is instantly dead. As if you were not listening to what I just said, Kaido just got flash frozen and just went. He just became dust. He just became dust. The guy is dust. He's dust. He's a dust cloud. Kaido is no more. He is defeated. He is gone. It is over. It is the first person that Luffy has killed in the story, and he's gone. And as this happens, Luffy already knows he's won with the activation of his Bankai, but he has to focus. If not, he will break his entire body. And Luffy being in emotional turmoil, thinking his whole crew is dead, well, this would lead him to start cracking and breaking. But this is when he would see Nami running up to him, saying, "Luffy, are you okay? What's this?" Seeing Luffy's white hair and his king's clothing all around him, she would be shocked. And with Luffy seeing Nami and seeing the rest of his crew emerge, he realized they were all okay. As Luffy would now be happy, he'd be extremely happy as he would put himself back together, focusing. And once that happens, that would be the end to Luffy versus Kaido. And Luffy would win. Extreme diff. Bankai needed. As this would be the end to Wano. As since Luffy has defeated Kaido, well, the Alliance will work together to defeat the rest. Oh my god, I cannot. The rest. I'm just gonna say the rest. Oh, the remnants of Kaido's crew. As the beast, or the beast pirates will be run out of Wano, and Wano will be liberated. Yamato not really taking any part, but being freed, of course, and meeting Luffy, talking about Ace and stuff. And Ace would have usually come to help Luffy in most of my what ifs, but he didn't come this time because he just knows Luffy is capable of doing it himself. And since Luffy decided to team up with Law to do it, he doesn't really feel like he needs to do it. He just knows Luffy will do it, as he knows Wano is on his journey. Robin has been reading the Poneglyph. She'll read this one, and of course, that would Momonosuke gets put into power. I didn't really talk too much about Momonosuke, but just know I said everything was going the same as it does in canon, so there was just no need to mention that because, well, what happens in canon, that does. And, well, with all this happening, Zoro gets Enma, basic story stuff that happens in Wano, and yeah, we're done. As this would normally be where I end the what if, but it's not because we have new content thanks to manga chapters. So now, what I'm about to talk about now is, of course, Egghead Island, so don't worry. If you're like, wow, this what if is kind of crazy long, there's not that much left, but I'm pretty sure you guys are enjoying this. I hope you guys are enjoying this. I really do. It's one of my longer what ifs, and I'm kind of doing that on purpose because of how long I've been gone, so hope you guys are enjoying it. But anyways, Luffy and his crew would make his way to head Egg Island, where he would run into Bonnie after his ship gets, kind of tilted over by the sea beast. I'm just gonna be saying the sea beast still gets them. I could easily say Luffy just freezes it, but whatever. And once that happens, he runs into Bonnie. They get to Egghead, the way they normally do, as everything will be going as you would expect until Rob Lucy shows up and he's like, "Luffy, I want my ones. I want to run them ones." And Rob Lucy is Hakurened and defeated. And yeah, that's the end of that. And again, if you guys weren't paying attention here, this would actually be where Luffy would activate Gear 5 for the first time on his own and actually use it. But Kaido did not push Luffy to use Gear 5. So Luffy still does not have Gear 5. So keep that in mind. He doesn't have Gear 5 yet in this timeline. And frankly, because I don't know how One Piece ends or really how strong Emu is, really, I can't really say if there's anybody in the story that could actually make Luffy ever use Gear 5. So with that being said, Luffy would then make his way, as you would probably expect, to the Vegapunk. He would agree to take Vegapunk off the island. They would wait a day, and that's where Kizaru and the rest of the island would show up as Luffy and his crew were planning on leaving. This would lead Saturn to summoning the other elders, that crazy stuff that goes on. And I would love to say this was some serious, difficult task, but no, Vegapunk, really any Vegapunk that stays with Luffy is just cool. They're just fine. There's just nothing these people can do. They all get Hyrukin or they get Sasashiki getting completely frozen. And of course, when Kizaru tries to fight Luffy, Luffy is so much more powerful than the last time they clashed off or they had their extreme dip battle. Kizaru gets, he literally just gets frozen completely. Like, I don't know what to tell you. He's frozen. He has no chance. He has, I don't even know if Kizaru even has Conqueror's coding, right? So I don't even know what to tell you. The spiritual pressure is just such a big difference maker because Luffy can just enhance all his attacks and he's way too fast for any of them. Like, just Gear 2nd plus Shupo, plus how much mastery Luffy gained over it after 2 years. It's not a contest. He just solos. And then when you factor in the Hado that he has, that he can just bind you. Like, he can just bind the elders, or he can just bind Kizaru just to get free hits in if he wants. It's not really close. And not to mention all of his, the Kido that's clearly the offensive Kido, which I'm kind of losing right now. The Bakudos he can just fire lightning strikes, or not Bakudos, my bad. Hados. He can just fire a twin lotus blue fire. He can fire that, which is like a Soren Sosuke, a Shahako. Rukia's used all these before, and that means Luffy can too. So it's just like he's not struggling here. So he gets Vegapunk off the island, and Bonnie doesn't go Gear 5 against Saturn, but she does punch Saturn, as payback. But she doesn't go Gear 5 because Luffy doesn't have Gear 5. And yeah, Vegapunk, end of the story, he's taken off the island. Everything's cool. Vegapunk is saved. The actual Vegapunk is saved in this timeline. And yeah, that's the end of that. That's just what happens. There's nobody that can challenge Luffy on that island, even with all that help and support. So once this comes to an end, this is where we would then see Luffy as he would make his way to the land of Elbaf, where the story actually stops. Now, here's the thing about Elbaf. I'm just gonna actually be ending the story pretty much here. Not ending the story, but what I'm basically gonna be saying is this is what happens, right? So I am gonna be saying manga spoilers. Luffy frees Loki. After freeing Loki, they go together as they beat some of the nightmare creatures that are made by killing him. After this happens, the Straw Hats basically battle Emu, because Emu actually shows up on Elbaf. And I did say manga spoilers before that, so you can't say I spoiled you. Anyways, because Luffy's so strong and so OP, I'm going to be saying Luffy unleashes his Bankai on Emu, then turning Emu into dust. Emu is defeated, and because Emu is defeated, which thanks to Emu coming to this island, actually, it makes my What If way easier to write, because there doesn't have to be a final battle with Emu, because Emu comes to the island full body, full power, and I'm just going to be saying Emu gets frozen, so Emu is defeated. Blackbeard doesn't get Emu's powers or anything crazy like that, and since the ruler of the world is defeated right here and right now, well, that's the end of One Piece, really, because thanks to that happening, Luffy now has a free just run to the end of the story. It's not going to be saying, and since I don't really know anything else that happens because it's not been written yet, I'm just going to be saying Elbaf is saved, Loki respects Luffy, he joins the crew makes their way to Laugh Tale, they find the Pirate King's treasure, Luffy becomes the Pirate King, and that's basically what happens. He becomes the Pirate King, they defeat Emu in Elbaf because Emu goes to Elbaf, and yeah, that's the end of that. Blackbeard tries to fight Luffy one final time for the treasure. Whitebeard actually never really cared about becoming the Pirate King, so Ace wanted to make him the Pirate King, becomes irrelevant once Ace really realizes that that's what Whitebeard truly wanted. And I'm just going to be saying by this point, Whitebeard has just passed away, and Ace knows what, Whitebeard really wanted to do. And of course, Whitebeard might tell Ace, go for the Pirate King treasure, but I think Ace would want Luffy to get it more than anything. So, as he did save his life, so I just think he would want it to. And plus, Ace just probably views Luffy as maybe the chosen one at this point, just due to how crazy he is. So with that all being said, that's pretty much what happens. Luffy becomes the Pirate King. He defeats Emu with his Bankai. He never finds out anything about, well, he does find everything out about Joy, but thanks to Robin reading the Poneglyphs. But he never comes back, is what I'm saying, because Luffy never gets pushed to do so. His Bankai is enough, and his Conqueror's Haki and all that stuff. So the world government is torn down because of this, and the elders are killed, the Holy Knights are killed because that would happen due to Emu being destroyed, and yeah, that's the end of this. We do a 5-year time skip where all the Straw Hats are separated, went back to their hometowns or wherever they want to go, and they've all achieved their dreams, as we will now switch to the final scene of this What If, where we will see Luffy back in his hometown, sitting there eating some food that was cooked by his lovely wife, Boa Hancock, which I barely talked about, but again, I've said this in previous What Ifs, shonen rules, just go with that. And as Luffy's eating that food, he's thinking about all the things that he's achieved in his life, all his crazy adventures he's went on, his crew, where they are, just thinking about them, just having a really good memory session. It's been 5 years since he became the Pirate King, and the world has just been changing all because of it. And as all this happens, Luffy would be happy with the way that everything turned out. And as Luffy sits there eating this pie, I'm going to be saying Boa cooked, he would sit there and think, I wonder, where did all these powers come from? He would wonder how he was able to use Keto, or how he had the ability to summon a sword from his soul, which he had pretty much realized was a part of his soul by this point. That's kind of necessary for you to be able to use Bankai. And he would just basically be sitting there like, where did all this come from? I wonder if these powers once belonged to someone else. He does remember the fact that he had that influx of information that gave him all the knowledge on how to use these things, and how he had to train to learn how to use them over all this time. As Luffy would sit there and wonder about these things, being Luffy, he would think, I used them to the best of my ability to reached Pirate King status. So I guess everything turned out right. He would smile a big bright smile as he would start to laugh. As Bo would say, Luffy, do you want seconds? And Luffy would say, yeah, I definitely want seconds. As Luffy, with his big smile, would obviously go to claim seconds, as this would be the end, as we see a fade of black to the What If movie, What If Luffy had Rukia Kuchiki's abilities. Now, I don't already know what you're going to say. That ending was a little rushed, but I mean, that's just going to happen when you don't have the official manga ending. And because Emu kind of being on Elbaf just kind of became the best plot device for me to just say Luffy, if he's strong enough, would probably just negative Emu at that point. And honestly, Haka no Togami, Rukia's Bankai, no, Emu's not surviving that. So yeah, if you guys did end up enjoying this what if, please be sure to leave a like, comment, share, subscribe. Sorry it took so long to get the full movie out. And I'm happy I made it pretty long for you. That, you know, if you guys care about Luffy what ifs, this is supposed to be me contributing for my mess ups over the past. And with all that being said, I'm going to be getting out of here. So I kept you guys long enough at this point, and I'm out. Until next time, deuces, guys. You guys have a great day and be blessed.